overcoming the fear of the coronavirus and the fear of any future pandemics that may come along. That's a mouthful, but that's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Are you sick and tired of hearing about the coronavirus? How about the power of the face mask? Are you sick and tired of hearing about that? HHS, Health and Human Services, has just come out and issued guidance suggesting that all Americans need to go back into the face masks. Why? Well, it's for your health, don't you know? Because who knows better than the government about your personal, private health status? Before I get into all that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for your faith-based podcasts. You can get Bold and Blunt at washingtontimes.com. Just go there, find my name, hyperlinked, click on it, and scroll to the bottom. You'll find some easy-peasy directions on signing up for not just my Bold and Blunt podcast that comes out every Tuesday and Thursday, but also my 3 times a week newsletter. It comes out Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Delivered right to your email box, contains all my commentaries that I write at the Washington Times, giving you the tools you need to fight the far left's lies, which are ongoing, daily, continuous. So check it out, sign up. And let me just quickly mention, you can also get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered. I want to play you this clip. It came out in the hours before Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Happy past Thanksgiving to everybody. Happy holiday season that we're about to go into. And you know, the holiday season doesn't bring just Christmas shopping and Hanukkah shopping and whatever shopping people normally do during the holiday season. It doesn't bring just baking and assembling with friends and family and good feelings for all and lights and fireplaces and hot cocoa and so forth. It brings all the bureaucratic warnings. Once again, Anthony Fauci leading the charge, kicking off our holiday season with this.
As immune compromise, first of all, everybody should be vaccinated and boosted with flu and with COVID. Whether or not you wear a mask, or another thing we shouldn't underestimate is testing. So when we're gathering at a family gathering for Thanksgiving or for Christmas or for any other holiday as we get into the winter, it makes sense that you might want to get a test that day before you come into a place in which you might be infected and spread it, or other people who might be there, in order to protect. So masking is important, but you can count masking, vaccine, boosting, testing. All of that is part of the spectrum of protecting yourself and your immune compromise.
Because it makes sense. Why does it make sense? Here's a question that never gets asked by the members of the media, so I'm going to throw it out there, as I've thrown out for over 2 years. Why does it make sense to get tested when you're not sick? What is this newfound love for medical testing that Americans have undergone the last couple of years, where they line up in droves at the doctor's offices and Walgreens and CVS, pharmacies and so forth for drive-through testing to see if they test positive for the coronavirus? We never tested before. We never tested to see if every flu season, say, we were carrying the flu. We didn't test to find out if we're sick. It's not like we were driving down the road and saw the drive-through testing clinic at the local CVS and thought, gee, I need to drive through and test for the flu because I'm not sure if I'm sick or not. Do you know how ridiculous that seems? Do you know how ridiculous that sounds, to test to see if you're sick? It's ridiculous. If you're sick, you feel it, you know it, you want to stay in bed, you want to have chicken noodle soup, you want to have hot tea and take hot baths, and you want to be left alone to recover. If you're sick, you don't need a test to tell you you're sick. Of course, there are exceptions. Let's get into the cancers and things like that. But a virus, come on. if you don't feel sick, why are you getting tested? Because what it does is give the government bureaucrats more data that they can then use to spread the fear and hysteria about the coronavirus, to justify the Anthony Fauci's of the bureaucratic world coming out and making ridiculous statements like he just made in the lead up to Thanksgiving, advising us to test, get the shots, get the boosters, get more boosters, not just the flu shot, but the coronavirus shot, every coronavirus shot, every year, every season, from now to infinity. When does it end? Where does it end? Thankfully, there are some out there in the medical community who have stood strong and held fast to the insanity that Anthony Fauci and his ilk have brought forward for over 2 years, and curiously enough, who continue to bring forward. Joe Biden just expanded the so-called health emergencies that we're all living under due to the coronavirus. This, as just a few weeks ago, he said, the coronavirus, the pandemic is over. So which is it? Which is it, Joe? Well, here's what it is. This is the government's way of holding captive the American people to fear in order to justify seizing, stealing individual God-given liberties and choices from said American people. And as I was saying, thankfully, there have been a few along the way in the medical community who have held fast to sanity during this coronavirus crazy. One such is Dr. Joseph Ladapo, Surgeon General of Florida. He's hated by Anthony Fauci, which makes him automatically gold star in my book. He's here today on Bold and Blunt to discuss his new book, Transcend Fear, a blueprint for mindful leadership in public health. And boy, don't we need some mindful leadership in public health going forward. But also to discuss the insanity of the coronavirus in recent years and what we can do to make sure the insanity never happens. Dr. Joseph Ladapo, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Cheryl. Really happy.
First off, congratulations on being appointed for a second term as Surgeon General in Florida. That's a big feat.
Yeah. I hope I'm keeping up some of my critics up late at night now with that announcement. So.
Yeah, I hope Anthony Fauci is having a miserable holiday season thinking of that.
Hope I'm showing up in their dreams. Oh no.
Nightmares, exactly. Well, let's talk about Anthony Fauci really quickly, because a lot of what you recommended in Florida as Surgeon General, dealing with the coronavirus and vaccines, which are more like shots than vaccines and so forth, counters Anthony Fauci's recommendations. Is there anything that he got right in terms of the coronavirus that you see?
That's a good question. I'm sure the answer is yes, that he did get some things right. For example, when he said that masks were not an effective tool during a pandemic back in February or March of 2020, he got that right. So that was correct.
Right.
And yes, it's not that the guy's loony. He has gotten some things correct in terms of assessments, for example, about who populations that are at increased risk. But for him, the bigger problem is that he was always very busy shaping information to fit his view of what Americans should do. So just there's so many examples, right? And it's getting harder for him to do some of those things, but really good examples include the fact that he did not. I mean, it took him a long time to make it very clear, and even now he's not perfect, about the difference in risk between older people and younger people. I mean, there's more than 1,000-fold difference. But he made many people feel that kids were in danger from being in school, whereas the attention should have been on nursing homes and older populations. So his legacy with this pandemic is he doesn't have a very favorable legacy, I think, in terms of this pandemic.
Well, it was one of generating fear and hysteria, which is why your book, Transcend Fear, a blueprint for mindful leadership in public health, is so crucial at this time in American history, because for over 2 years, Americans lived by the Anthony Fauci particular brand of fear. What do you hope to accomplish in this book? And just to summarize, when you say transcend fear, going forward, what should we learn from the coronavirus lockdowns, how to not do that again?
Yeah, that's a really important point, because we can be certain, and I know that I've read some of your writings, which I've appreciated, and you have insight, which is wonderful to see, because I think many people don't have insight, which is what allows so many people to be misled.
Thank you.
So that is the key piece there, that people become more present to what happened, so that they can essentially learn to come to terms with what happened to themselves, and maybe for people who feel that they did things that in retrospect they weren't proud of or wouldn't do again. And I mean things like getting mad at other people for not wearing masks, or feeling that it was okay to discriminate against people who didn't take the COVID-19 vaccines, or doing other things that weren't very charitable just because someone had a different perspective than you. I think that people coming to terms with what happened, the fact that they were absolutely misled by people like Dr. Fauci, is a critical step to help all of us avoid ever getting to that point again, where we've become so easy prey to manipulation by fear, which is exactly what happened.
I got to say, Dr. Ladapo, I'm not optimistic, though. I agree with you completely, but I look around in my Northern Virginia community and see far too many people riding down the streets in their cars alone wearing face masks. And I still hear the narrative of get the shot, get the booster. Anthony Fauci just came out in the hours before Thanksgiving reminding everybody to get the boosters. I just don't see America going back to pre-COVID normalcies in terms of liberties. Do you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think that we will in the long run. I totally hear you with what you're saying in terms of what you're seeing. But what I remind myself of is when this whole thing started back in March 2020, I was working at UCLA in the hospital, and I was working in the hospital when Governor Newsom shut down the state. And I got to witness what was happening there. I took care of some patients with COVID. I wrote the first article about how I saw COVID-19 policy is shaking out, that was published in USA Today. And I kept writing after that. At that time, it was literally me and my wife, and I don't know if we knew any other person in our own community. And obviously there were other people, like there were the American Frontline Doctors, people who were, strong, very innately strong advocates for freedom. And there were other people, but those voices were very quiet. They weren't prominent. Most of what we were hearing, right? Everyone stay home, everyone 6 feet or whatever, all this. So when it started, there were very few people who were vocal against it. And as the pandemic went on, that side has gained more and more supporters, and it's been gradual. And now, there are so many people who see the lies and the waste and the harms of the pandemic policy, and I think that trend's going to continue. So it's gradual, and we're going to still have people driving around with masks, but that side of the battle is getting thinner and thinner every day. It's gradual, but it's a real progress.
I think it's going to depend largely on the ability of those on the front line of issuing medical advisements to stand strong on truthful data, such as yourself. You came out in Florida and you advised against a certain segment of male populations not taking the messenger RNA shots for a very good reason. Could you detail that? And is there any reason that you see of flipping on that guidance you issued?
Yeah. So we did a study of death and cardiac death in many age groups with these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. And basically what we found is that young men, their results from the study showed a signal for an increased risk of cardiac death, unlike any other age group. And of course, that also happens to be the age group that has an super increasing incidence of myocarditis. So pardon my informal, non-scientific, but you struggle to think of the right term. Literally, their risk of myocarditis is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times higher than other populations when they receive these COVID-19 vaccines with mRNA. So the study is preliminary. There's some method issues that can shift the estimate to make it smaller or to make it larger. But this was the only group, and the right thing to do at this point in the pandemic was absolutely to recommend against it, considering just the total uncertainty about whether there's any benefit at this point for people who've had COVID, and that is almost all of the people in that age group, whereas the risks don't change associated with the vaccine. So it was absolutely the right thing to do. I actually anticipate that there will be more groups that are identified with data to have a signal for increased risk, for which these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines will not be recommended. And and that's even just part of it. If we had more time, I would talk about other things, such as the fact that these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines, according to a paper that was published in Vaccines, have a serious adverse event rate of 1 in 800, which is so much higher than any other vaccines that are commonly used. They're just inherently less safe than other vaccine products. And sadly, ironically, they've been pushed harder than any. So it's sort of it's a terrible combination.
Well, here's the thing. We don't actually need the time to delve into the data. I think that would be a fascinating discussion. But this argument about the shots shouldn't be so much over whether you believe the data or don't believe the data. It should be about individual choice. And forcing people to take these shots is horrible. I'm sure you agree with that, the mandates.
Oh, God. It's interesting. And so, absolutely. And I think that ultimately, the idea here in Florida, we have required vaccines for kids to go to school, but we also have an opportunity for parents to file an exemption, which is completely honored. So it's encouraged for regular vaccines, not these COVID-19 vaccines. So it's encouraged, but it's not forced because people can opt out. And I think that ultimately, there are many things that we all have to do because we live in a society and that's just how it works. And so we have to account for how our actions affect other people. But when it comes to your body, that is something that's given to you by God. And no one has any right, authority to put anything in your body without your consent, without your agreement. And so that's my take on it, and it is. I feel very strongly about that. So the mandate shouldn't have happened in the first place, but the injury was quadrupled by the fact that these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines are just much less safe. They are essentially unsafe products. Their safety profile is just so poor that it's something that should be used with much more caution than they've been pushed.
I shudder to think about our military and what's going to come out in terms of repercussions for forcing them to take the shots in the coming years. But I know our time is tight, and I just wanted to get back to your book again, Transcend Fear, A Blueprint for Mindful Leadership in Public Health. This is not, as some people might think, given your medical background, a dry medical discussion. You talk about your own personal experiences in overcoming childhood trauma and so forth, and going through a dissociation period. Anything you care to discuss about that aspect of your book?
Yeah, that's definitely the heart of the book, and going through that process and getting help from my wife, who she helped me personally, but she also helped direct me to people who could help me, and ultimately I worked with a guy named Christopher Maher, who used techniques from Chinese medicine and meridian theory and stuff related to the flow of qi, which I did not believe in before working with him. But thank God that I worked with him, because that's why I'm sitting in the seat that I am right now. I would never have become Surgeon General, would never have had all of these opportunities. I would never have had the clarity to see what was actually happening and distinguish that from my feelings, my entanglements, my fears, and things like that. So that's the heart of the book, and because it really made everything possible in terms of the work that I was able to do, and I was really happy to share it, because I know that there are people out there, and it's not everyone, but everyone has struggles, and there are people out there who want to have more, have greater sense of freedom and peace and clarity, and don't want to be stuck in fear or agitation or shame or self-doubt. And so I share my journey that allowed me to, get mostly free of all those stuff, and certainly compared to where I was before working with Christopher Maher, to get completely free. So that, for people who are interested in that, that's why I shared those things, and that's why I tried to be as transparent as possible, so that people could have a good understanding of what was going on with me before I worked with him, and how working with him allowed me to do the things that I did, because I worked with him right before the pandemic. And I was very happy to share all that.
It seems like such a testament to God's glory, because as I read the description of your book, you overcame abuse of such depth and level that it made you unable to connect with people. And now you are in a position where your whole job is about connecting with people and healing people. So it just seems such a spiritual and powerful journey.
Well, thanks for saying that. And it really is. I mean, it really does come down to a spiritual journey, because you're absolutely right. I experienced sexual abuse by a babysitter as a kid, and I actually thought it didn't affect me. I went on in my life, I did well in college, I went to med school and all that, and I thought that I was fine. But what was really happening is that when that woman broke my boundaries as a little 4-year-old, I basically shut down my heart and sort of built this cage around my heart and my consciousness, and that prevented me from essentially having an authentic emotional connection with other individuals. I had no idea, of course, and that's how trauma works. Like, you don't know that your mind has created all these things to try and quote unquote protect you, but they almost inevitably disconnect you from other people. And fortunately, I fell in love with my wife over the phone, accidentally, basically, because that would never have happened if we were together. And when you fall in love, everything that's not working in your life, or that you've got stuck in your emotional closet, comes to the surface, because that's how love works. And that began another journey that was very difficult, but eventually led to healing. And you're absolutely right. So I'm so grateful for that, because I love connecting with other people now, and it's something I can experience. And it is part of how I can be as effective as I can be in my job, because you can't do good work when there's so much uncertainty, and there's so much fear, and there's so much spiritually connected to your environment, the people in your environment, just every component in your environment that you can think of.
Wow, what a fascinating story. What a fascinating life you've had so far. Transcend Fear, a blueprint for mindful leadership in public health. Dr. Joseph Ladapo, I really want to thank you for being on Bold and Blunt, and thank you for standing strong for liberties and common sense as Surgeon General in Florida.
Oh, thanks, Cheryl. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. Look forward to maybe seeing you in person. Are you in D.C.? If you're in D.C., maybe when I'm up there, I'll send a message to you.
Oh, yes, please do. And when I'm in Florida, I'll shoot you a message as well. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Transcend Fear. This is how the Amazon description goes. In part, Florida Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo shares the inspiring story of how he came to be who he is. After experiencing abuse as a child, Dr. Ladapo was incapable of connecting emotionally with other people. He was dissociated from virtually everything in his life and numbly powered through college, medical school, and residency to become a doctor and university professor. It wasn't until he fell in love with his wife that he was forced to come face to face with the enormous emotional and spiritual disruption caused by his deeply buried trauma. It's a story that transcends politics, and it's one that you're not going to want to miss. I want to thank you for listening, remind you that you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, or wherever podcasts are offered. And I want to wish you a happy holiday season. And yes, that includes Merry Christmas coming soon. But I say happy holidays because I understand that not everybody celebrates Christmas. So happy holiday season to everybody. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.